Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another presentation of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. That's PBBI from California State University, Fresno. And this is part of our Portuguese Immigrant Week in California series. We are very excited about this evening's event, as we are going to talk to an author about a book that he published and about the Portuguese American experience in California and beyond. So again, once again, on behalf of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute and the California Portuguese American Coalition, as well as, of course, our sponsors, FLAD, the Luso American Development Foundation, and the government of the Azores, we want to welcome each and every one of you. And we want to welcome the author. We'll be talking about the book that you just saw on the slide, and I have actually the copy right here, which is by Joseph Miranda Lima. And the title is called Thanks America, An Immigrant's Journey. And I should say a Portuguese American immigrant from the beautiful islands of the Azores and from the beautiful island of Graciosa, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm mistaken, he'll tell me, but I don't think so.
That's correct.
That's correct. Good. Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this evening.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Thank you for inviting me to discuss my book. I appreciate that very much, especially in this special week.
Yes, I thought this was the perfect week to talk about your book. We can't do anything in person at Fresno State yet, but next semester we'll be able to, and hopefully you'll be able to come down and we'll do an in-person event. But for now, this week is a special week. It's Portuguese Immigrant Week in California. It's been 55 years since the first time that it was declared by then Governor Ronald Reagan, who became one of our presidents. And every single governor from both political parties have declared the second week of March as Portuguese Immigrant Week in California. So let us dive into the book. And I've been reading it and I've enjoyed it very much. And you basically the book is your story, and with lots of different details, which are very enlightening. And so, tell me first and foremost, what incited you? What drove you to write it?
Excellent question. You know, I had an interesting life, as I explained it in the book, and family members and friends ask many times, what are you doing? What are you doing here or there? What are you doing in Russia? What are you doing in Iran? Those kind of questions. Even my daughter, who was born much later, after I have done a lot of the traveling, and she would ask me, Dad, what'd you do here? What'd you do there? And so about 8 years ago, I decided that way I have a story to tell, and I'm going to tell them. I'm going to write about it. I was fortunate that my wife is from Connecticut, and we were spending a lot of time in Connecticut, and I was bored. So I started writing the book, and that's how I started it.
And so, but nothing against Connecticut. Thank God it was boring in Connecticut, or else we wouldn't have had the book. So I'm grateful that that you were a bit bored there, and so are most of your readers. So you started writing the book, and how long of a process was this? How long did it take you to write this? Did you write every day, every week? How was this process? Tell us a little bit about that.
That's a very good question. Also, I got on the computer, and I did not have, in Connecticut, I did not have any notes or anything. I didn't have my diaries, which I had somewhere in California. So I just started writing. I did not think about how the book was going to be laid out or anything. I just started writing from the time that I was born and grew up in the Azores to the present. So I started I think it was about 8 years ago, and I finished 2 years ago. I finished at the end of 2019. And fortunately, the COVID kind of, followed up my schedule. But it took me about 4 to 5 years to do it. I like to mention also, I had no professional help. And I didn't want professional help, actually. I wanted to do it on my own, myself. And that's exactly what I did. You can see when you look at the book that, there's some things in there that could have been done slightly better than what they are, but I wanted to write my way.
Right. Indeed. And I'm glad you did. That's what makes it personal. And so you start the book, of course, you explain, and that's wonderful. You explain a little bit about the Azores. You even have a map of the Azores, because sometimes you mention the Azores to people, and not everybody's from Central California, but people, you have a map about the Azores. You talk a little bit about the Azores. You talk about your native island of Graciosa. Why did you think it was important to talk a little bit and to show some maps about the Azores and everything? What drove you to do that?
Again, my daughter was born, actually she was born in Chile, but she grew up in California. And I had in mind my friends, American people, this is written for the family, friends, both Portuguese and American friends. So a lot of them, as you mentioned, had no idea where the Azores were. So I needed to put that information down, a little information about the Azores and some information about Graciosa. And I wanted to get in some detail growing up in the Azores, and I hope I did that.
You did. And you talk a little bit about your, a little bit about your life in Graciosa, actually. You describe the donkeys, and you describe, some of the daily things, and you even have a picture of your fourth grade diploma, which many probably in the Portuguese American community know. Some do, some don't. But at that time, that was the required education. You did not have to go. Actually, the other education costed money. There was money, there was involvement in what we would call today high school. So you in Portugal at the time that you and I were raised up, which is about the same time, we were by the age of 10 or 11, it depends when you started school, you were done with the schooling for all of your life. And so this was interesting. You talk about your schoolmates. You talk about some of the some stories that happened to him, and you kind of associate those stories then with things that happen in today. I like that a little bit of sometimes going forward and going back to associating those stories with it. But then I was fascinated with the story about coming to America, because I could relate to it. So, I think all who left Portugal, or even if it wasn't those who following us, it wasn't them, but their parents probably told them stories. And how was that experience? Tell us a little bit. I mean, I read it, but tell us a little bit about that experience. About, I believe your dad came first, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. As you mentioned, yes. When I was 11 years old, I was done with school. So what do you do in the Azores when you're done with school? You go to work. At those days, today may be different. In those days, there's not much to do. My dad could not afford to send me to Terceira. I would have had to go to Terceira to continue my education. He could not afford it. So I went to work. First, I started helping him. And then I got a job with in a fish, tuna cannery, more specific.
Mm-hmm.
And the owner of that tuna factory was actually from Terceira, Senor Barcelos. So I worked there for 3 years, just about 3 years. And then before coming to the West. Now, my dad realized with 7 kids that there was no life for us in the Azores. And so he decided to come to the US. He was lucky in some ways. I explained that as, in the book. And he came 6 months early. And where did he end up? He ended up in Santa Clara, because he had a friend of a friend who lived in Santa Clara. So he stayed with him for almost 6 months, working in Santa Clara Valley, picking fruit. So in those days, and the Silicon Valley was mostly farming. Anyway, so we came here. My mom then followed up in December of 1960 with all the kids, 7 of us. The youngest one was 2 years old. The oldest one, my brother, Manuel, was 17. And so she had a, quite a job. Fortunately, I'm just going to mention it quickly. Fortunately, we had an uncle. I had an uncle, my grandmother's brother, a grand uncle who was on the same flight, and his wife spoke English. So we were able to, to get through the U.S. customs somewhat easily.
Indeed. Going back to Terceira, and I mean, going back to the islands, and this case, of course, not Terceira, but to Graciosa, you explained something that I think younger generations would probably enjoy reading this part, which is, I mean, they'll enjoy the book, but they'll enjoy when you talk about the cows, and the cows have names. I mean, when you have 522 cows, it's hard to have 522 names, or nowadays, nobody even has 522 cows. A dairy has to have 1,500 cows or more that you can't survive. But something that probably Portuguese Americans of second or third generation don't know is that in the Azores, especially in the 1950s and 60s, and even some parts of the 70s, most people had just very few cows. Most people had 4 or 5 cows, and they all had names. They were kind of a member of the family, weren't they?
That's right. Exactly. They were members of the family. You walked around the cows, you talked to them, you petted them, and generally, on the book I explain, most cows are, they're okay. One cow did not like me very much, and so that was part of that experience. But you're right, there was names for the animals, and because they were part of the family.
Yeah. They not only produced milk, but they also were the ones that worked the farmland.
That's exactly right. The 2 cows primarily that my dad had, and one of the cows, the older cow, was exactly my age. And those cows were used for milk, which I talked about there also, and for the work as an oxen in the fields. And unbelievable, all they can be trained. A lot of Portuguese know that, but a lot of people do not know that they can be trained fairly well. And they, again, it was like a member of the family.
And so one of the stories that was one of the different events that happened on your way, on your journey to America, was the plain food. You didn't care much for the stuff that might have been prime rib, might have been something else, but explain to us what kind of feeling did you have when you looked at that meat, because it wasn't a carne asada or an alcatra or anything like that.
Yeah, it was quite an experience, and one of those experiences you don't forget. It was at those days. The airlines were, they really took care of the passengers.
Sure, they give you good food. Yeah,
the waitresses, the attendants at the doors. You walked in there, everything is nice. We had even the dishes were actually porcelain dishes. Anyway, so they bring the food out, and I look at this. There was a few vegetables on the side. There's a bun, some bread, and then a steak in the center. I look at the steak, and it was so red. It's not the way that I was used to it. It was red, and I looked at it, and I mentioned in there, a lot of people say that U.S. people and the airlines, they use horse meat, and I thought, geez, my brother was sitting next to me, and I said, this looks like horse meat to me. It's red, so I set it aside. I did not touch the meat. No, it was, most other people thought it was a great steak, but not for Manuel and I. We didn't think it was that good. So we ate the bread, the butter, and the vegetables, and we left the meat out. It's just one of those experiences. It was the first experience about American food. Not a good one.
Mm-hmm. And so you came to America. You originally, I believe if memory serves me correctly, you graduated from Turlock High School, was it?
Yes. I first went to, when we came here, I mentioned in the book, we were very fortunate. Gallo, my dad, by the time we got here, my dad was already working for Gallo in Livingston, Gallo Venus. They gave us a house. So for free. So we had a house in the middle of the fields when we came here. And so that was in December, right? It was cold, foggy, frost in the morning. So that in itself was quite an experience for somebody coming from the Azores. I had never seen frost. I never seen. We saw from Graciosa, we could see the top of Pico. There was snow up there. So I started in grammar school, Livingston Grammar School. And I talk about that also. I had very good people who kept me in school. My mom also said, you got to get educated. I could have gone to work, even though I was 14 years old. I could have gone to work. There was a lot of kids at Gallo, especially Mexican Americans, working that were younger than I was. But again, between those people, they helped me. And my mom, I went to school. And then when I finished 8th grade, then I went to Livingston High School for 1 year. And that was kind of the beginning. 3 years later, we moved to Turlock, from Livingston to Turlock. My dad got a job in Turlock. We moved to Turlock. I went to Turlock High School. And yes, I graduated from Turlock High School.
And you were a product, as many of us, and still are, of one great, what I consider one great, also Californian and American institution, which is a community college. It gives opportunities for people to continue and then to build on. You went to, I believe, Modesto Junior College, MJC, right? You went to Modesto Junior College. You graduated with your Associate of Arts, and so right from high school, was there always the idea of going to college was always in your mind and your parents?
It was in my parents, it was in my mind, but there were some obstacles along the way. And I talk about it, again, there's some, I had an excellent high school experience. It's in the book, the things that I did, the things that I was associated with. But I had also, some people, one of my advisor in high school, when I mentioned I want to go to college, he said, why? There's all these Portuguese business out here, dairy, he knew the dairy. He said, why don't you go out and work in the dairy business? You can be a salesperson, you can be this. And I did not go by his advice. I did not go by, his name? Well, I'm not going to mention his name, but he was a good person. He just thought that Portuguese from the Azores, 3 years or 4 years in the country, should go to work, not go to, to university, to college. And so I did not go by his advice. And then I ended up going to Modesto Junior College, which is not a great experience, especially with some of the teachers. The teachers at Modesto Junior College, in the ag, everywhere, on all departments, but especially the ag department, was probably the best group of teachers in California. When I went to Cal Poly after MJC, they always said, you came from the best junior college in California, again, in the ag program. So I got a great, education in junior college and high school and junior college.
And that's so interesting that you had that experience. I thought I was the only one, although I know one other person, a friend of mine, who had that experience. When I was in high school, the same thing. When I was in high school, I at that time, I believe, was the end of the freshman year. Now I think it's actually the sophomore year, but at that time, the high school I was going to, it was the end of the freshman year, and that I had met with a counselor, and it was a gentleman, and he asked me what I thought, what I wanted to be. And I said, I've always wanted to be a teacher when I was in Portugal, and I came over, I was 10, and and he says, well, you're Portuguese, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, you could present yourself well. I think you could be an excellent hay salesman. I think you really. So I think we probably had the same kind of. It wasn't in Turlock, but it's interesting how people just sometimes not out of meanness, not of but just hey, you're Portuguese. You people just don't go to college. That was kind of the idea.
Yeah, he was a great person. He was a constant. Again, but he gave me that advice, which
you didn't take
I ignored it.
And so from Modesto, you went to Cal Poly, and that's a big change because, first of all, your family's all in Turlock. Cal Poly is 2.5, 3 hours away. It's a big move. Portuguese families didn't like to see their not just their daughters, their sons. They didn't like to see their sons go away to college, or go away, basically move. They may never come back, and they like to keep you in the same kind of wing. So how did the family react to that? And tell us a little bit about your Cal Poly experience.
That's absolutely right. When I finished MJC, Modesto Junior College, applied and was accepted at Cal Poly. By the way, I just want to mention this. My advisor, my counselor at TMJC was Dr. Hodges, Stan Hodges. He still lives in Modesto. He was the president later on of Modesto Junior College until about five years ago. He was still there, and he was my advisor. He was my counselor. And when I was trying to go to the 4 years university, I didn't know what to do. So I went to him. I said, "What do you think I should do?" He gave me 3 choices. He said, "Listen, you can go to Chico State, Fresno State, or Cal Poly." And he gave me, pluses or minuses about those. And I said, "Well, maybe Chico State, it's in the Valley, and because I thought they had a pretty good program." And then he said, "But I'm going to tell you something. If you can go to the best school, go to the best school." And he thought the best school was Cal Poly, even though he himself was a graduate of Chico State.
Right.
Then he's got a PhD later on somewhere else. But so I ended up, going to Cal Poly. When I told my parents about that, especially my mother, they were very emotional. The day that I left, to go, exactly, the day that I left Turlock to go to Cal Poly, it was a very emotional experience between my parents and I, and even my siblings, because of exactly that. My mom knew that I would probably never live there again permanently. I came back in the summers to work and, on some holidays, but I never lived again in Turlock permanently, because from Cal Poly, then I ended up going to Bakersfield.
Okay. And so tell us a little bit about, and without, of course, we're not going to go over the entire book because the idea is for people to purchase it and buy the book. But you indeed, after school, you indeed had a career that took you to many different parts of the world, and with lots of different rich experiences, which you detail, you chronicle it very well. With some of the things that you did, all the way, from Saudi Arabia to other parts of the world. Some parts very exotic. Most people don't go to Saudi Arabia, or most people don't go to certain countries that you've gone. First of all, what took you to those countries, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, Superior Farming Company. From Cal Poly, went to Superior Farming Company in Bakersfield. Mm-hmm. Superior Farming Company was owned by Superior Oil Company. It was a company out of Texas, but with a lot of oil business in California, in Taft, California, mm-hmm. West of Bakersfield.
Right.
And so they bought these properties. The 2 owners, Howard Keck and Bill Keck, really wanted to go back to their roots, which was agriculture in Texas. So they bought this huge company in Bakersfield. They put it together. That ended up having 40,000 acres of land. This is all irrigated land. We're not talking about pastures or this is all irrigated land, mostly north of Bakersfield, but there was some south of Bakersfield, Coachella Valley, and even Fresno. We had about 1,000 acres in Fresno. Anyway, they also were pioneers in drip irrigation, especially in drip irrigation. And so I came out of Cal Poly in ag engineering, was in soils and machinery. I could have gone either way. So I went to soils. I worked for Superior Farming Company. Well, I found my niche there. I mean, I really loved to work for Superior. And they also realized that, that I had some potential. So 3 years later, before that, I had an experience, I think I talk in the book, I had some Iranians that came to Bakersfield for 3 months to learn about agriculture and irrigation. And I was in charge of them, for 3 months. And that was an experience. Again, they have to read the book to see the experience. Sure. They're quite an experience. And so then when they went back, and we designed 4 systems actually for Iran. They gave us all the information. We put the designs together. And then when it came to build the systems, the Iranian Ministry of Agriculture, the people said, wait a minute, we can't do this by ourselves. We need some help. So Superior Farming Company, my supervisor, came to me and said, listen, do you want to go to Iran? and here I am. I mean, I had only been in the United States for a few years, and I thought, gee. So I took the opportunity. So I went to Iran for 1 year. And then from there, I went to a lot of other places around the
Sure.
world. Correct.
And all, of course, because of your field in agriculture.
That's correct. Field of agriculture, but also, I'll tell you, it had to be with my background. Henry Chavez, who was the vice president of Superior Farming Company, a Mexican background, but he said, if there's anybody in this company that can do, it's you. So he said, because of, and I had an accent, I still have an accent. And so, he said, you can adapt very well to, to these other societies, cultures. That's why we want to send you there. And so started from there.
Indeed. And of course, from there, you went to different parts of the world. And that is probably, and I haven't finished the book. I think that's one of the fascinating parts about it, is that you detail, different passages of different things that happen to you that make it interesting in different parts of the world. And some of them, most of it interesting, obviously, but how, I mean, it must not have been an easy task to, like you said, you had been here in this country not that long. It's not like you were born and raised here. And then, a few years after working for the company in Bakersfield, to go to Iran. I mean, how was that experience of being in a total different, because it's, although you were used to coming from a different country, but it's a total different experience than coming from Glacials, I'm sure.
Absolutely. It was a kind of a shock to the system. But again, I adopted well. I tell my wife now that no way in the world could I have gone to Iran if she was with me. She could not have lived there.
Mm-hmm.
I lived there very simple, with the basic things, as I talk about in the book again. It's the only time they actually smoked was when I was in Iran, because I was fairly bored when I was not doing something, not traveling throughout the country. I traveled throughout Iran for all these projects that we had in different places. And so it was a heck of an experience. One thing that I did, some people who made traveling and almost got me in trouble, I talk about in the book. I always carried a camera with me, and I had a really nice 35mm camera. I took pictures everywhere I went. And so I kind of, fell in with the country. I knew that some things that you're not supposed to do, I was, cautioned. I like to mention also, Superior Farming Company had no, other than the oil business, had nothing overseas. This was the first time. So I had no training before going to Iran, absolutely none. I picked up a book, to learn a little about Iran on the way. And so I like to mention also the experience of going there. And again, people have to read the book, because I took that as an opportunity to stop in Portugal. So on the way to Iran, I stopped in Lisbon. What was happening in 1976 in Portugal?
Yeah,
right after the revolution. It was a mess, and it was nothing what I expected to see. But I was there for about a week.
Was that your first time?
That was the first time. Exactly.
In Lisbon.
First time after, it was the first time in Lisbon, right. And there was the first time going back to Portugal after coming to the United States. So I had quite an experience there. I talk about it. I went to Italy. I had quite an experience in Italy for 3 days. But I wanted that opportunity at least to see Portugal and Europe before going to Iran.
Now, you lived in many of these places. Many of these places you visited, short term, there's a little bit longer term. You spent quite a bit of time in Italy.
Yes. Well, Iran, again, was the first time. And that was the beginning. After that, Superior Farming Company, again, was not only involved in irrigation, but they were also pioneers in new varieties of grapes and stone fruit. And interesting enough, it's not there now, but our nursery, Superior Farming Company nursery, was on Church Street in Fresno, or Church Avenue, I think, Church Avenue in Fresno. And they developed a lot of varieties, patented and then trademark varieties of grapes and stone fruit. The big grape It was at that time the best white, green grape, other than Thompson, but it was the best grape called Superior Seedless. It's still in the market today. Most of the grapes you see in the markets today are Superior Seedless. They don't call that, anymore.
Mhm.
But anyway, so with those varieties, there was somebody in Italy that wanted our varieties. They wanted to propagate the varieties. They wanted to sell them in Italy to the farmers of Italy, and not only in Italy, but North Africa, Middle East, and mostly North Africa, Middle East, and Europe. And so they sent me over there to work with this Italian company to do that. And because of that, I traveled, lived in Italy for about 3 years. By this time, I was married, so my wife and I went there, and I traveled quite a bit throughout North Africa, the Middle East, while my wife, most of the time, sometimes she traveled, but sometimes she stayed in Italy. But she created also some friends, American friends that lived there, and some Italian friends. So we had a great experience in Italy. And then after that, since you mentioned up Italy, then we came back to the US. Actually, the Italian experience, well, I'm just going to mention very briefly. The owners of Superior Farming Company changed. They changed from Superior Oil, as I mentioned earlier, to Mobil Oil. Mobil bought the company. Then Mobil wanted nothing to do with a farming company, so they sold it. They sold it to a bunch of investors out of New York. Well, these investors out of New York did not like what they saw in Italy, mostly our partner in Italy. So there was a feud between the two. And we came back, and of course, that experience, well, after I came back, then we went to Chile. I went to Chile for 2 years. And that's when our daughter was born in Chile, Santiago, Chile.
Yeah, indeed. I thought that was quite interesting. So she was born in Chile, but and you explained that in the book, but because both of you were American, she was not a Chilean citizen automatically, correct?
That's correct. It's
okay.
interesting because a lot of people don't think about that.
Yeah, yeah.
The Chilean law, to begin with, we were not residents of Chile. We were actually residents of Italy. I could have gotten my passport in Italy. I didn't, but we were residents in Italy. We were not residents in Chile. I was actually a tourist in Chile. Because of that, we had to leave Chile every 3 months. But she was born in Santiago, Chile. And even though you're born in Chile, doesn't mean you become an automatic Chilean citizen. And what it meant was that she could apply to become a Chilean citizen once she turned 18, which she did when she turned 20. And she is now, she is American, Portuguese, and Chilean.
Right.
And
the Portuguese was an endeavor, from what I remember from the reading. And it only happened because of something that happened in the 1960s and 70s with a lot of us, myself included, which is name changes. Explain that a little bit to us, because I think that's fascinating. And sometimes people don't understand. People say, and they ask me all the time, why did you change your name? Even my kids ask me that. Well, it wasn't kind of a choice. It was just done for me. But it was a different world back then. But I know that she wanted to become also, and she is now, from my reading, a Portuguese citizen. But it wasn't as easy as becoming a Chilean citizen.
That's right. That's right. That's, and it was kind of a shock to me that it was a little difficult. Well, to go back to that, I became a naturalized American citizen in 1964. And at that time, and I don't know about today, but at that time, they didn't really care about anything. But you want to become an American citizen? Okay, give me show me your name. What name you want to have as a natural American citizen? Actually, my mom chose the name. Why not become Joseph? Because she knew a Portuguese American named Joseph. So I said, fine, become Joseph. So my name changed from José Miranda Lima to Joseph Miranda Lima. No problem. All the way through. I was known as Joe. Most of the time in school, I was known as Joe, but my official name is Joseph Miranda Lima. And so when she applied, she applied she applied at the same time for both. She got her Chilean within a month or 2 months. The most, she got a Chilean citizenship, fairly easy. When they got to the Portuguese, became a problem, big problem. And the biggest problem was there was a couple, actually it was the birth certificate. I like to mention that. The birth certificate was one of them because she was born in Chile. She had the Chilean birth certificate and she had the American birth certificate by the State Department, U.S. State Department. We made sure we went to the State Department or the consulate office in Santiago to make sure that she got a birth certificate in English. So we took that to the Portuguese consulate in San Francisco. They looked at it and said, sorry, we cannot accept that. We need something from Santiago, Chile. We need to have the Portuguese embassy in Santiago, Chile, stamp your birth certificate. And we thought, oh, heck. So it so happened that she wanted to go, well, it's part of the thing there. She took a trip to South America for 1 year. She backpacked throughout South America for 1 year with her then later to be husband. And so she stopped in Santiago, and we took that as a huge opportunity to go to Santiago and show her Santiago, where she was born, and a little, about the Santiago. So we went to the Portuguese consulate, consulate in Santiago. It was a lady, I forgot her name. She was excellent. She said, I don't know why they're asking for this stuff. But she went ahead and stamped the birth certificate. We came to the US, everything seemed like it was great. Until they look at the names, my Portuguese name, José Miranda Lima, and my naturalized American, Joseph Miranda Lima. I said, wait a minute, this is not good. We cannot accept this. And they said, well, you're gonna have to tell us how you went from José Miranda Lima to Joseph Miranda Lima. And I didn't have any answers. So when I went to Graciosa, the Azores, I went to the Registroville, I think it was there. I told them my problem. And they said, listen, we cannot do anything about that. But you go to your village, to the mayor, I forgot what, the village. And when he said that, I said, great, because the mayor was actually the son of my cousin. So I went there. He said, oh, yeah, we can do that. We'll write you a letter saying that José Miranda Lima and Joseph Miranda Lima is the same person. And he did that. He stamped it, came to the US, gave it to Tamara, to our daughter. She took it there, and finally they did it. But even that was difficult because they sent it to Lisbon and took about 3 or 4 months before they finally authorized it. It was an experience.
Yes, indeed. The Portuguese bureaucracy at its best. And
it was at that time anyway.
It still is, my friend. I can tell you that. And so and we're not going to take too much of your time. As Satan says, somewhere around 45 minutes or so. And I know that, but at the end, when you finished writing the book, how pleased were you with it?
Well, it's a good question. I actually came to, all of a sudden I said, okay, I think I'm finished writing it. I did have something a little at the end of the book. I wanted to say something about my family, because all of my grandfathers and my great-grandfathers came to California.
Yeah, you have that wonderful explanation at the end with pictures and everything else.
They all went back to Graciosa or the Azores. And, I wanted to give a little explanation about that, because especially my mother's grandfather, my mother's father, my maternal grandfather, he worked in Santa Cruz, California, where today is University of California, Santa Cruz, the same grounds. And so I talked about his experience, some of his experience there, and that information. So yes, thank you. Yes, something that I wanted to do at the end. So all of a sudden, then I finished pretty much at the end at that time, and then I just added that portion at the end of the book.
Right, and then of course you. One of the things that you talk about a lot about your travel experience, but you also dive into some very personal issues, with health and everything else. And how important was it to talk about, and how hard was it to talk about those personal experiences?
Something in my mind as I wrote the book, I was not really writing for me. I was writing for somebody down the pipeline, whether it be my daughter, she doesn't have any kids, but maybe some future grandkids or whatever. So I wanted some information about, my wife and I, yeah, I did talk about my health
Hmm.
at that time, and still some of the same issues. I still have some of those issues today. I talk about, of course, my moving from Bakersfield to Modesto.
Hmm.
I worked for Modesto Irrigation District. It was, it's a great. I worked for two organizations: the Prairie Farming Company and then Modesto Irrigation District. And then I retired from Modesto Irrigation District. I talk about that, and so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Again, as you said, if people are interested more, to read more, to know more about it, is you pick up the book. Oh, are you gone?
No, I'm here. I just showed it. I'm just showing. I'm
Oh,
just
yeah, yeah,
showing that they
yeah.
can,
Okay,
that
thank
folks
you.
can get it. That folks can get it directly on Amazon. It's called "Thanks America: An Immigrant's Journey," and you have it there. Those of you who don't do paper issue, they also have a Kindle. Many people read now electronically, and so it has a Kindle edition as well. Just to give people an idea if they'd like to acquire it. Sometimes people say, well, you talk about books, but you never tell us how to get the book. So here's one aspect that we can get it. And hopefully in the near future, when we are back to in-person events at Fresno State, we can have Joseph down and we can have him present and with some books for people to buy and
Yeah,
for you to autograph it,
Misha, just
obviously.
like a couple of things about that. Yes, thank you very much. I published through Amazon, and also it's $9.38 if you buy it through Amazon. And I can buy as an author for much cheaper. I will donate the book to anybody who wants it. If they write to me or they ask me, I will give them a book for free. I make no money. I think I make 20 cents a book or
Sure,
25
I'm
cents a
sure.
book.
Yeah,
The royalty.
you're not making much at $9.
No,
I can
it's
tell you
not the
that.
reason I wrote the book.
Right.
It was to, it was not to make money. So again, I just want to mention that to you.
Well, that's great. If folks are interested, if they get a hold of me, I can get a hold of you, and you can get them the book. That's very generous. Um, how we're commemorating as we started in the beginning Portuguese Immigrant Week in California. How much of your life, Joseph, was shaped by who you are as an immigrant from the Azores? How did that play a role in becoming the person that you became?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, my beginning, traveling and all that stuff, my background had a lot to do with if you want to call it success. And so, and even today, one thing that I have never been too much involved as my brother has with the Portuguese community as much as he has. I have, I belong to some clubs. I belong, PFSA and other. It
Right.
was SES and UPEC before, right?
Right.
And so, but I never really became closely involved with those organizations. But I always followed that. I always fought. I always listened. I'll tell you one thing interesting. When I was in Iran, I got a shortwave radio. It was the only communication with the outside world. Why? I listened to the I forgot what was that, Portuguese broadcasts and BBC.
Mm-hmm.
It was because I want to keep up with what was going on in the world. So my Portuguese background, it became very important in my life and what I pursued in life.
I'm going to read just one little quote here, if you'll allow me, and those
Sure.
listening as well. And it says, when I go back to Gracias in recent years, I try to recreate those memorable moments, but it is not possible. The awesome singing canaries have been extinct in the wild. There is noise from cars and other motor vehicles, which did not exist years ago. So the environment for those peaceful moments does not exist anymore. How is it going back to an island that's different? How are your feelings about that?
Oh, that's amazing. Extremely emotional. Because when I go back there, not only that, but also go see the pieces of land that my dad had. He had about, I think it was 12, I mentioned in the book, 12 pieces of land, but all very small pieces of land all over the island.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a lot of memories about those places. And I go back there to look at them. One of them has a little cave where he used to go there to have lunch. And then as a young kid, I think I mentioned in the book, my dad always trying to carry a little wine with him, right? And everybody drank wine, even the kids drank wine. So I would drink a little wine with him and then I'd fall asleep. And so that was, very important. But if it was I would tell people out there that came from the Azores and had a similar experience. I'm not sure if I can do it. It would be great to write a book, a full book about that experience that I had. When I was writing that, I thought, gee, I can turn this into a book.
Mhm,
Just that experience of growing up in the Azores and the life in the Azores at that time, and compare it to what life is today. It
mhm.
is changed. Nothing even close to it what it was back in the 60s and late 50s and 60s.
Do you feel still, though, after all these years, do you feel that when you go back, they still welcome you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I still have. We have a house there. I
Mm,
mentioned in there. We remodeled our house. We go back there. The bad thing is we don't use it enough,
mhm,
and we use it all the time. I've been going to the Azores almost every year,
mm,
except in 2009. I'm sorry, 2008, because my wife had leukemia. She was in the hospital for quite a while, and then during COVID,
mhm,
2021 and 20, no, 21, 22 last year, I went back to the Azores with my brother.
mhm,
We went
mhm.
back there. And so other than that, for 25 years, I would go back to Azores every year, and usually always go to Graciosa, but also see some of the other islands.
Right. So,
Very important.
right, and so to end it, you say in the book you talk about that your life kind of is an epitome of the American dream. What is that? What to you has been important about achieving this that makes it really your American dream? What of your life in the United States?
You know, Again, go back to when I mentioned leaving the Azores and coming to the United States. There was these visions, you heard things about. I did not know anything, by the way. I
Hmm.
had no English.
Hmm.
The few words that I learned was mostly, I think my grandfather told me how to say thank you.
Hmm.
Most of the other things were I learned after coming here. So I did not know English, but I had these visions of the country. What am I going to be? What are you? And and so these dreams, yeah, if I want to say, and I pretty much accomplished those dreams as I went along. There's also one experience I explained there when I was in Graciosa after church. Leaving church, and you probably a lot of people my age that grew up in there know what happened. There was always something going on after church,
Hmm. Hmm.
and one of them was this magician was waiting for the people to come out of church. We all got around them, and he would play tricks. He'd put coins on your ears, and he pull coins out of your hair, out of your sleeves, right? And he also tell stories about. So he turned to me, and this is wasn't my head for you. He turned to me for some reason which I cannot. I don't know why. And he said, "Oh, yeah, you're gonna be tall. I'm not tall, but I'm fairly tall, especially for the Azores." And he said, you're gonna travel a lot, and you're gonna be rich. You know something? I am not rich, but we live very well. And I did travel the world, and I am fairly tall. And I keep thinking about what the guy told me. I write in the book about it, and I said, gee, what a dream, to have that, and then kind of accomplish what this guy told you.
One last thing, and I promise it is the last one. When as you said, in the end there of the book, you go back and do kind of a genealogy trip to the family, to your forefathers, those who were here in America. You talk about Manuel Correa Lima from the 1870s, Tristão Lima from around 1890. You talk about your family and their connections. As you said, many of them had come here and worked here and then went back to Graciosa. When your parents came here, did they ever talk about we're going to do what grandpa did or what great grandpa did? We're going to go there for a few years and come back. Was that even ever a thought about it or no?
I think my mom had that in mind. I think my mom did that. My dad, I'm not sure, but she did. But as you know, when you get a bunch of kids and you grow up in another country in California, and especially once they started getting married, going back became very difficult. She always dreamed of going back. When would we fix the house when they were still alive? And the idea was that they would go back there and live in the house, where my mother did not. My dad still went back there a few times after we remodeled the house. And but you're right, no, but they never said they, we're going to follow their footsteps, or no. I think if they had those thoughts, it did not
Right.
materialize.
It might have been in the back of their head, but it wasn't something
Yes,
that was a goal,
especially my mother.
Yeah, it was not a goal. I mean, I know that my own father, that was his goal, because similar to you, my grandfather had been an immigrant on my mom's side, not on his side, but he had been here 19 years actually in Tulare County, in the same city I live in, not too far from where I live today. But and my dad, when he came to America, was his dream was to be here. Maybe my grandfather was here, as I said, for 18 years. My dad thought maybe we'll be there 12 years, a dozen years, and we'll come back, and he had his house and of course his land. And that didn't happen. I married fairly soon, and then we had grandkids. And actually, he told me one time, he said, thanks for spoiling my dream. I'm not going back now. I'm not going to leave my grandkids. So, but anyway, I think there is probably sometimes that in the back of your mind, but it seemed like that earlier generation of your grandparents and great grandparents and great uncles, etc., they had that tradition a little bit more of coming over here, working a few years, and going back.
Exactly. I like to mention one thing quickly here. Those people who are listening, you'll see in there on my book that I said I had a story to tell. But I tell a lot of people who ask me about, and I said, listen, you have a story to tell. Just think about it and write about it. Write it down, put it on paper. So those people that are listening, that whatever the experience may be, think about writing your memoir or whatever. And so that's something that I highly encourage people to do.
Indeed. Even if it's just passing on from family, if they don't want to publish it, it's very important.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, Joseph, thank you so much. Joseph Miranda Lima. The book is right here, as you can see.
You can call me Joe also.
I will call you Joe also. All right. Okay. So, Joe, thank you so much. The book is here, and as we showed it, it's called, as I said, Thanks America, an Immigrant's Journey. And Joseph, so you gave the title Thanks America in the aspect because I take it, and from reading it, you feel, and I'm not going to judge it one way or another. I'm going to have you do it. I could take a crack at it, but you feel that some of these things could only be accomplished in this great country.
Exactly. I mentioned that in there. Yes. As a matter of fact, at the beginning, I have a quote from the Supreme Court Justice
from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yes, indeed. Yes.
And
yes.
You're right. I feel that what I accomplished could only be accomplished in this country. As I mentioned also, my dad could have gone to Brazil. He almost went to, two places. He almost went to Luanda, to Angola, and then Brazil. I don't want to say, but I kind of glad he didn't, because coming to the US, I was able to accomplish those dreams that I had. You're right. And so that's why I say, thanks America for what you gave me.
And thank you, Joseph, for spending time with us, for spending this basically hour with us, telling your story. Again, the book, Thanks America, An Immigrant's Journey, highly recommended. And as Joe said, take time to also write down your stories. Best of luck, and we'll be in touch. And again, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. And
thank you very much.
Happy Immigrants Week to you. Happy Portuguese Immigrants Week to you as well.
I really appreciate it, and especially in this special week. It's great.
It is, and it's a special book. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.